Hey everyone. After 37 years of believing I knew my wife better than anyone, life decided to rewrite the ending I thought we'd earned. My name is Michael. I'm 62, and until 2 years ago, I ran a small commercial real estate firm in the Midwest. I sold the business, handed the keys to my partner, and stepped into the quiet rhythm of retirement I had pictured since I was 30. Susan and I have been married 37 years, together the same amount of time. High school sweethearts who somehow made it work when so many others didn't. We have two grown children, Emily, 35, a nurse who's planning her wedding next spring, and Alex, 32, a high school history teacher who just finalized his own divorce. No grandkids yet, but we were already arguing over whose house would host Thanksgiving. It was a crisp October morning, the kind where the maple trees outside our two-story colonial turn fiery red and the air smells of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke. I stood at the kitchen counter in my flannel robe, the ceramic mug warm against my palms, watching steam curl upward like lazy ghosts. Sunlight slanted through the bay window, catching dust motes and the faint scar on the oak table where Alex once carved his initials with a pocket knife when he was 10. Susan moved around me with the effortless grace she'd always had, 61 now, silver threading through her dark hair, but still the same woman who could quiet a classroom of rowdy teenagers with one raised eyebrow. She wore the soft gray cardigan I bought her last Christmas, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and the faint scent of lavender soap lingered whenever she passed. We had fallen into a gentle routine these past 2 years. I tinkered in the garage restoring an old Mustang. She volunteered at the library 3 mornings a week and kept the garden immaculate. Our evenings were quiet. Tea on the porch, reruns of British mysteries, the occasional phone call from the kids. I felt settled, proud even. 37 years without a single major crack. Or so I believed. That morning, she poured coffee for both of us, set my mug down with a soft clink, and lingered a second longer than usual, her fingers brushing mine. I noticed the slight tremor in her hand, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Michael," she said, voice softer than the autumn light. "We need to talk tonight. After dinner. It's important." I chuckled, assuming it was about Emily's wedding budget or Alex's custody schedule. "Sounds serious. Should I be worried?" She turned away quickly, busying herself with the dishwasher, but I caught the micro-expression, lips pressed thin, shoulders rising just a fraction. "No," she answered too fast. "Just something from the past I should have told you years ago." The words landed oddly, like a single wrong note in a song I knew by heart. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a forgotten debt, or a health concern she'd hidden. Susan had always been the strong one, the one who handled crises with quiet competence. But something in the way she avoided my gaze made the kitchen feel suddenly cooler, the sunlight less warm. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness sharper on my tongue than usual, and watched her move through the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. Later that afternoon, Emily called, excited about venue options, and Susan's laughter sounded perfectly normal on speakerphone. Alex texted a meme about retirement life. Everything looked exactly as it had for decades. Yet when Susan hung up and caught me watching her, she offered that same careful smile and said, "Tonight, okay?" I nodded, but a small, unfamiliar weight settled in my chest, like the first faint tremor before a house you thought was solid begins to shift on its foundation. I had no idea that the conversation waiting for me after dinner would rewrite every memory I owned. Michael enters the story in a state of deep, long-term security. 37 years of assumed mutual honesty contrasted sharply with the subtle cracks Susan's body language now reveals. Past versus present is the core tension. The retired businessman who once thrived on reading clients now fails to read the woman sharing his bed, while Susan's charming, manipulative poise, honed over decades, keeps her secrets invisible until the exact moment she chooses to crack the door. The ordinary sensory details, coffee steam, lavender soap, maple scent, highlight the illusion of permanence he still clings to, even as her micro-tremor and evasive phrasing plant the first emotional distance. This contrast between expectation, a peaceful retirement built on lifelong trust, and emerging reality, a past she suddenly needs to confess, creates the psychological hook. Michael's calm confidence is about to be reframed as naive blindness, setting up the slow erosion of everything he believed was unbreakable. The rest of the day passed in the kind of comfortable rhythm that had defined our retirement. I spent the afternoon in the garage, the scent of motor oil and old leather mixing with the cool draft from the open door. My hands moved automatically over the Mustang's carburetor, but my mind kept drifting back to Susan's words. Something from the past. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe an old argument she wanted to clear before Emily's wedding, or a secret Christmas gift she'd hidden for 30 years. Susan had always been sentimental that way. When I came inside at dusk, the house smelled of rosemary chicken and the faint vanilla of the candle she liked to light on the dining table. She had set the table with the good china, the one we used only for special occasions. That alone should have warned me. We ate slowly, talking about Alex's latest date and whether Emily should choose the outdoor pavilion or the ballroom. Susan laughed at all the right moments, but her fork moved food around her plate more than it lifted it to her mouth. Twice I caught her staring at the window, reflection showing a face tighter than usual. After dinner, she poured us each a glass of the Cabernet we'd bought on our last anniversary trip. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling low, casting long shadows across the bookshelves lined with 37 years of family photos. She set her glass down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen, part fear, part exhaustion. Michael, there's something I've carried for almost 30 years. I thought I could take it to my grave, but the older I get, the heavier it feels. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady, the same tone I used in boardrooms when deals were slipping. You're scaring me, Sue. Just say it. She took a shaky breath. When Emily was 5 and Alex was 2, I had an affair. It lasted almost 2 years. His name was James. He was a substitute teacher at the school where I taught. The room tilted. The fire suddenly sounded too loud, the wine too acidic on my tongue. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She reached for my hand. I let her take it, but my fingers felt numb. It ended when he moved away. I ended it. I chose us. I've regretted it every single day since. I heard the words, but they refused to settle. 30 years. My mind raced through birthdays, holidays, the night Alex had his tonsils out, the trip to Disney when Emily was 7. Every memory now tainted by the possibility that while I was building our life, she had been living a double one. Yet even in that moment, a part of me wanted to comfort her, to say it was ancient history. That was my blind spot talking. The man who had never once suspected his wife of anything worse than forgetting to buy milk. She continued softly. I kept one letter he wrote me after it ended. I thought I burned it years ago, but I found it last week when I was cleaning the attic. I can show it to you if you want. I stood up too quickly, the chair scraping loud against the hardwood. I need air. I walked out to the porch, the night air sharp against my skin, stars cold and indifferent overhead. Inside, Susan remained on the couch, small and suddenly fragile in the firelight. That night we slept in the same bed, but miles apart. I lay awake listening to her breathing, the same rhythm that had soothed me for decades, and wondered how many nights over the years she had lain there carrying this secret. The suspicion that had been only a faint tremor that morning now felt like a fault line running straight through the center of my chest. I told myself it was over, that people make mistakes. But a quieter voice, older, sharper, whispered that nothing this big stays buried without leaving cracks. The next morning, she was already up, making coffee like nothing had changed. But when she handed me the mug, our eyes met. And for the first time in 37 years, I saw the careful distance she had perfected long before I ever noticed it. Susan's central mistake was believing that 30 years of silence could erase 2 years of betrayal. Her manipulative charm had allowed her to compartmentalize guilt so effectively that even she began to believe the version of their marriage she presented. Michael's mistake was immediate rationalization, its ancient history, a coping mechanism rooted in 37 years of secure attachment that refused to update its model of reality. The lesson crystallizing here is that delayed confession does not heal. It only transfers the wound to the betrayed partner at a stage when rebuilding feels almost impossible. By revealing the affair now, Susan triggered the exact emotional avalanche she had spent decades avoiding, while Michael's first instinct to comfort rather than confront exposed his lifelong pattern of prioritizing harmony over truth. These mistakes reveal how love can become a form of mutual denial, teaching that honesty deferred is honesty deformed. The days that followed felt like walking through a house I had built with my own hands only to discover the foundation was hollow. I went through the motions: morning coffee, afternoon garage time, evening calls with the kids, but every interaction with Susan carried a new weight. She moved more carefully around me, her voice gentler, as if afraid any sudden sound might shatter what remained. I noticed small things I had never paid attention to before. The way she still kept one drawer in her desk locked, the way she deleted her browsing history every night, the way she sometimes stared at old photo albums when she thought I wasn't looking. Emily came over for dinner that weekend, bubbling with wedding plans. Susan lit up in the old way, showing her fabric swatches at the kitchen table, but I caught the moment Emily asked, "Mom, remember that teacher you used to talk about when I was little? Mr. James? Whatever happened to him?" Susan's hand froze mid-gesture, a tiny flinch that only I noticed because I was watching for it now. She recovered smoothly. "Oh, he moved away years ago," but the air in the room shifted. Emily didn't catch it. She laughed and moved on to centerpieces. Alex, joining us later, mentioned in passing that his ex-wife had accused him of emotional distance just like Dad. The words landed like a quiet accusation I hadn't earned, yet suddenly wondered if I had. I started paying attention to mail. A plain white envelope arrived addressed to Susan in handwriting I didn't recognize. She tucked it into her cardigan pocket before I could ask. When I casually mentioned it that evening, she said it was from an old book club friend. The lie was small, but it was the first deliberate one I had ever heard from her lips in our entire marriage. That night, I lay awake, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking seconds that felt heavier than before. I realized I was cataloging her movements the way I once analyzed balance sheets, looking for discrepancies. A red herring arrived when Susan mentioned a doctor's appointment. She came home teary-eyed and said the results showed early arthritis. Nothing serious, but enough to explain her recent quietness. I felt relief flood through me so strongly it embarrassed me. For 2 days, I believed the affair confession had simply been her way of clearing her conscience before facing a health scare. I even held her longer than usual that night, whispering that we would face anything together. She cried softly against my shoulder, and I thought we were healing. But the locked drawer nagged at me. One afternoon while she was at the library, I sat in her small office, the room smelling of lemon polish and old paper. I told myself I was only looking for the arthritis report. My hands shook as I tried the drawer, unlocked for the first time in memory. Inside were old lesson plans, a few cards from students, and a single yellowed envelope postmarked 28 years ago. The return address was simply James. I didn't open it. Not yet. I closed the drawer, heart hammering, and walked out into the backyard where the last chrysanthemums were browning at the edges. That evening, Susan found me sitting on the porch steps. She sat beside me without speaking, the silence stretching until she finally said, "You found the drawer." It wasn't a question. I nodded. She reached for my hand again, and this time I let her. But the warmth I had always felt in her touch now carried the chill of something I could no longer fully trust. The suspicion had grown from a tremor into a steady, unrelenting pressure behind my ribs. I still loved her, but love alone no longer felt like enough protection against the truth I could sense circling closer. The first irreversible stage occurs when Michael hears the initial confession. Knowledge cannot be unlearned. The second stage is the discovery of the locked drawer and the unopened letter, crossing the moral boundary of privacy he never imagined violating. The red herring of the arthritis diagnosis temporarily resets his hope, illustrating how the mind desperately seeks innocent explanations even when evidence mounts. The point of no return arrives the moment Susan acknowledges, "You found the drawer," confirming deliberate concealment rather than simple guilt. From here, reconciliation becomes exponentially harder because every future touch, every shared memory, now carries the shadow of deliberate deception maintained for 3 decades. These stages show how suspicion transforms from abstract pain into concrete action, and how once the betrayed partner begins verifying reality independently, the relationship's old architecture is already condemned. I waited until the house was quiet. Susan had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. The letter felt like it was burning a hole through the desk drawer upstairs. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, the glass cool and heavy in my palm, and carried it to her office. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light, but the rest of the room remained in shadow. I opened the drawer, slid the envelope out, and for a long moment simply held it. The paper was brittle, the ink faded. I told myself I had the right to know. The letter was 3 pages long. James wrote with the intimacy of someone who had once known her body and her fears. He spoke of the afternoons they stole while I was at work, of the guilt that eventually ended it, and of the child he sometimes wondered about, Alex's birth date mentioned in passing. My stomach turned. The affair hadn't just been emotional. There had been moments when she had considered leaving me. The letter ended with a plea for her to be happy and a promise he would never contact her again. I sat there until the scotch was gone and the house felt colder than the October night outside. When I finally climbed the stairs, Susan was awake, propped against the headboard, eyes red. She saw the letter in my hand, and her face collapsed. "You read it," she whispered. "Every word." My voice sounded foreign to me, calm, almost gentle. "Is Alex his?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "I had a paternity test years ago, quietly. He's yours." But James, he suspected. That's why he wrote the letter. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the furnace seemed to hold its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. 37 years, Susan. You let me build this life believing every single day was real. You let me comfort you when Alex was colicky, when Emily broke her arm, when my mother died. All while this ghost was living between us. She reached for me, tears falling freely now. I was terrified of losing you. I was young, Michael. You were working 80-hour weeks. James listened. It was wrong, and I ended it. I chose you every day after that. I stood up, the motion sudden. You chose silence. That's not the same thing. She cried harder, the sound raw and unfamiliar. I didn't comfort her. For the first time in our marriage, I let her feel the full weight of what she had done. The confrontation wasn't loud. No shouting, no thrown objects. Just 2 people who had shared a lifetime suddenly looking at each other across an unbridgeable chasm. The letter lay between us on the quilt like a third presence in the room. I slept in the guest room that night. The sheets were cold, the pillow unfamiliar. In the dark, I replayed every anniversary, every "I love you," every promise, and watched them fracture under the new light. The illusion didn't just crack, it shattered completely. And in the stillness that followed, I felt something I hadn't expected, the first faint stirring of clarity. Michael's restrained composure during the confrontation, pouring scotch, reading the letter alone, speaking in measured tones, directly channels decades of business-honed emotional control, preventing the explosive rage that would have destroyed any future dialogue. Susan's tears and rapid defense. I chose you every day after that. Reveal the manipulative personality now stripped of its charm, forced into raw vulnerability. The physical act of placing the letter on the quilt connects internal devastation to external evidence, collapsing 30 years of gaslighting by omission in one quiet moment. This emotion-to-action link marks the precise pivot where love detaches. Michael's shock crystallizes into emotional independence the instant he hears the paternity doubt, proving that withheld truth, once revealed, severs the bond more cleanly than any single act of passion ever could. The weeks after the confrontation settled into a strange, courteous limbo. We spoke in polite, careful sentences about groceries, the lawn, Emily's wedding. Susan moved into the guest room without being asked. The house felt larger and colder, every room echoing with memories that now carried footnotes. I took long drives in the Mustang, the engine's rumble the only sound that didn't feel like a lie. At night I sat on the porch with a single beer, watching the stars and realizing I no longer knew the woman sleeping down the hall. Emily noticed first. She stopped by unannounced one afternoon and found Susan crying in the kitchen. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her the truth, gently, without details. Her face went pale. "Mom? An affair? When we were little?" The betrayal rippled outward, touching the next generation. Alex's reaction was quieter but sharper. He called that evening and said, "I always wondered why Mom seemed sad sometimes. I thought it was me." The guilt in his voice tore at me. Our children, now adults, suddenly had to rewrite their childhoods too. Susan tried to repair. She left notes on the counter, cooked my favorite meals, even suggested couples counseling. I attended one session. The therapist asked what I needed. I answered honestly, time and space. Susan nodded, tears in her eyes, but I saw the fear there, the realization that this time her persuasive charm might not be enough. I consulted a lawyer, not for divorce, but for options. We agreed on a temporary separation. I kept the house. She moved into a small apartment downtown near the library where she volunteered. The day she packed the last box, I stood in the driveway, hands in my pockets, watching her car disappear down the street we had driven together for decades. The ring stayed on my finger, for now. I wasn't ready to close the door completely, but I was ready to stand on my own side of it. That first night alone, I walked through every room, touching objects we had chosen together. The couch where we watched our kids open Christmas presents, the bed where we had conceived them. Grief rose in waves, but beneath it something steadier was forming. The realization that my life had never actually belonged to the version of us I had worshipped. It belonged to me. Michael expected the confession to either destroy the marriage instantly or allow a path to forgiveness after 37 years of shared history. Reality delivered neither. Instead, a slow, dignified uncoupling that preserved civility while exposing the illusion of permanence. He had imagined Susan's charm would eventually smooth the wound. Instead, her attempts at repair only highlighted how long she had practiced emotional management at his expense. The contrast between his pre-confession vision of peaceful retirement and the post-confrontation reality of separate addresses forced a painful awakening. The marriage he thought was his greatest achievement had been partly fictional for most of its duration. This gap stripped away the final layer of denial, replacing it with the quiet certainty that self-respect required distance, even if love had not entirely vanished. For months have passed. The divorce papers remain and signed on my desk. We are still deciding. Susan and I meet for coffee every other week. Careful, honest conversations that feel more real than many we had in the last 30 years. She has started seeing a therapist alone. I have too. The children check on both of us, navigating their own rewritten histories with a grace I admire. Emily postponed her wedding by 6 months, not because of us, she says, but because she wants to walk down the aisle without carrying our secrets. I wake up earlier now, make coffee in the quiet kitchen, and sit on the porch watching the same maple trees turn color again. The air smells cleaner somehow. I've joined a men's group at the community center, retired guys like me who have lived through their own quiet earthquakes. We don't fix each other, we just listen. On weekends, I drive the Mustang to the lake where I taught Alex to fish when he was 8. The water is still, the sun warm on my shoulders, and my thoughts no longer circle back to what she hid. They stay with me. I have learned that betrayal at any age reshapes the ground beneath you, but it does not have to bury you. The man who once believed 37 years of loyalty made him safe now understands that safety was never guaranteed. It was chosen, day after day, by both of us. Susan chose silence for decades. I am choosing honesty now, even when it hurts. Some evenings I still feel the ache of missing the life we built, but the ache no longer owns me. For the first time in years, I feel the quiet power of standing alone, steady, clear-eyed, and finally free to decide what the next chapter will be, whether she is in it or not. The house is still home, but it is my home now, filled with my choices, my memories, and the hard-won peace that comes when you stop pretending the past was perfect and start building the future on truth. Across the entire arc, Michael's journey from lifelong trust to cautious independence illustrates how even the longest marriages can contain hidden fault lines that, once revealed, become the foundation for authentic self-reclamation. The cumulative lessons: silence is its own betrayal, delayed truth wounds twice, and composure in crisis preserves dignity, emerge not as abstract morals, but as lived truths forged in sensory moments. Coffee steam turning bitter, letter paper brittle under trembling fingers, lake water still under morning light. Susan's charming secrecy and the letter from James exposed how guilt can masquerade as devotion for decades, while the children's reactions added generational layers to the pain. Michael's growth is clearest in the contrast between his early rationalizations, its ancient history, and his final quiet confidence. He no longer needs the illusion of perfection because he now honors reality. The story closes not in bitterness or full reconciliation, but in empowered reflection, proving that freedom after betrayal is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self-ownership. Nearly 1 in 3 long marriages carries similar hidden fractures. Yet Michael's choice to live with open eyes shows that the final chapter can still be written by the person who finally decides to hold the pen.